What if I told you that the main number we use to measure our global success is actually a giant misunderstanding? Well, today we're going to take a hard look at the global GDP and unpack the massive $120 trillion illusion it might be hiding. $120 trillion. I mean, that's the ballpark figure for the global GDP. It's a number so big it almost doesn't mean anything. We're told it represents our wealth, our progress, our output. But the big idea we're diving into today is that maybe, just maybe, we've been reading the scorecard upside down this whole time. So what if that $120 trillion isn't our wealth at all? What if it's just a measure of our effort? Think of it like the metabolic rate of our collective anxiety, all the energy we burn just trying to stay in one place. We're going to look at this through two really interesting, kind of mind-bending lenses. Okay, first up, the hungry ego. This lens completely reframes our economy. It says the whole thing isn't really about feeding our bodies. It's about feeding our collective identity, our ego, and its bottomless need to feel important. This model just nails it. You've got the hunger of the eye, which basically says our GDP is a measure of how busy we have to be so we don't have a total crisis of meaning. Then there's the Red Queen's race. You know, that idea where you have to run as fast as you possibly can just to stay in the exact same spot? Well, that's our economy. And over time, we start to think the effort is the point. We mistake the sweat for the prize. All right, our second lens is a bit different. Let's imagine a cosmic joker, a trickster who's just looking down at all of our very serious, very important work and just laughing. To the joker, our economy looks like Sisyphus, but with a spreadsheet. We work like crazy to push this boulder of value up a hill. It gets to the top, evaporates at the end of the year, and we just start all over again. I mean, from this point of view, it's just absurd, right? Cleaning up an oil spill or treating stress actually makes our GDP go up. It's like our economy has become a measure of how much we've complicated the simple act of just being alive. Yeah, the Joker gets it. True wealth is stuff that's often free. Silence, good health, real connection with people. And he just sits back and watches us spend $120 trillion a year trying to buy back the peace we absolutely destroy just to make the money in the first place. It's a cosmic joke for sure, and we're the punchline. So what happens when we mash these two ideas together? You know, when we put the hungry ego and the cosmic joker in the same room? Well, you get a calculation about how we spend our global effort that is truly staggering. So get this, the estimate is that a stunning 70% of our entire global economy has nothing to do with actual survival. You know, food, basic shelter, health. Nope. It's dedicated to what we're calling ego-sustenance. Only 30% is for our real physical needs. The rest, well, it's pretty much for show. And that 70%, it comes out to $84 trillion. This is the annual ego tax. It's the price we all pay every year for things like status signaling, endless distraction, and building our personal brands, all so we can feel a little more permanent. Now, you're probably thinking of things like luxury fashion or social media. And yeah, they're definitely part of it. But the real heavyweight champion of the ego tax, the final boss, if you will, is real estate. Because it takes a fundamental human need, shelter, and turns it into the ultimate status game. Let's break it down. Of the roughly $20 trillion we spend on real estate across the globe, the actual cost to provide safe, dignified housing for every single person is about $7 trillion. That other $13 trillion, that's the ego premium. It's what we pay for a fancy zip code and curb appeal. We literally spend almost twice as much on the story of the house as we do on the actual house. But what if we just stopped? What if we all just decided not to pay the ego tax anymore? This is where the whole idea goes from being a critique to something truly mind-bending. Let's imagine for a second what we could do with all that freed-up energy. When we do that, we get what's called the creativity surplus. That's the $84 trillion that's no longer being burned, just to fuel the ego story. It's suddenly available for whatever we can dream up. Now, to really wrap your head around how enormous this is, let's put it into perspective. People estimate it would cost about $175 billion to clean up our oceans. With an $84 trillion surplus, that's a rounding error. We could fund that and not even notice the money was gone.
How about this? You want to give a personalized PhD-level AI tutor to every single child on Earth. That would run about $200 billion a year, a tiny, tiny fraction of the surplus. Done.
Let's go big. Something really out there, like funding a permanent colony on Mars to make sure humanity has a future. $1 trillion a year. We could do that. Easily. And here's the absolutely wild part. After solving some of humanity's biggest problems and funding our sci-fi dreams, we would still have over $40 trillion left over every single year. Just for art, for deep thinking, for philosophy, and for play. Okay, I know, this all sounds amazing, like a utopia. But let's be real. Moving from an economy driven by ego to one driven by purpose, it wouldn't be some smooth, easy transition. It would be a chaotic, society-shaking withdrawal from a drug we've been addicted to for centuries. It would probably happen in 3 phases. First, financial ghosting, where all the imaginary wealth tied to ego just evaporates. Poof. Then comes a massive identity crisis, where people would have to figure out who they are without their job titles. But then, finally, you'd get the great repurposing, where we could take all those monuments to ego, the empty skyscrapers, the military hardware, and rebuild them for actual human flourishing. So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. If we could actually get that $84 trillion back, what's the first monument to ego in your world? That empty office building, that ridiculous luxury mall, that gated community that you would want to repurpose? For art, for community, or just for play? It's a big illusion, yeah, but it's a powerful one to think about.